I'm back, baby. Yes, hello everyone. Welcome back to BaxtyB F1. I am back after a long break. I did explain in one of my previous videos that I have had to take a little bit of a break from content creation simply because I've been doing my job. I've been doing some opera singing. Insert video of me doing some kind of practice for about 5 seconds here. Okay, so, yeah. But we are here today to talk about the Monaco Grand Prix, and I know what you're thinking. You haven't done review videos for Baku or for Miami yet. Well, I will try and maybe do a stream where I kind of talk about them and give my driver ratings, but I want to try and stay as up to date as possible. We are going to be talking about Monaco, so without further ado, let's get to the results. Pole position, Max Verstappen, one of the great laps. We'll talk about that in a moment. And he also took the race win. It's Monaco, pretty expected. Second, Fernando Alonso, and in third place, Esteban Ocon, of all people. Very impressive from Esteban Ocon. I was very happy to see that. Drove a brilliant qualifying to get... Well, he qualified fourth initially, then there was a penalty for a certain driver, and then he was promoted to third and drove a great race to take that third place, and only the third podium of his career as well. Fantastic effort by Esteban Ocon. Let's get to the talking points. So quickly, the race was pretty boring for about 50 laps. Then it rained. Then there was chaos. And then it ended up basically being the same top three as we had at the start of the race. Verstappen ahead of Alonso, ahead of Ocon. And this weekend, Max Verstappen showed how good he is. My God, what a weekend he had. He was looking quick all weekend, but in Q3, he had a pretty bad first lap. And then after 2 sectors of his final run, he was 2 tenths down on Fernando Alonso. Fernando Alonso looking like he'd got the Monaco pole, but Verstappen produced a third sector from the gods. Now look, I know what a lot of detractors are saying. Oh, Max Verstappen is in the fastest car, of course he could do something like that. No, he had to be inch perfect. And it was a magnificent qualifying display from Max. Rightly deserved all of his plaudits. He produced a final sector. There's one shot of him going around one of the final corners where he is inch perfect. He is that close up against the wall where you can't see any gap. He absolutely nailed it. He was that on the limit in that final sector that he delivered a pole lap that essentially won him the race. It was a magnificent lap, worthy of all of the praise. And then in the race, he did 50 laps on a set of medium tyres. Now that's raised a lot of questions about whether Pirelli's tyres are too durable, and rightly so, but still to be able to do that. And yeah, okay, he had a lot of clean air out in front of him, but he still had to manage those tyres, and he was managing traffic, and there was concerns over the conditions. He did hit the wall a couple of the times once the rain arrived, but he managed everything perfectly. This was his 39th career win. It puts him ahead of Sebastian Vettel in the all-time Red Bull list. And for me, this was the weekend where Max undisputedly won the World Championship. Yeah, I know we all knew he was going to win anyway, but I think Checo was threatening something, but we all knew it would peter out. Checo had an absolutely awful weekend. He qualified last, and then just was all over the place, really. We'll get to that shortly. But Max, for me, this was the weekend where he showed I'm going to win this World Championship. He did that in Miami as well, and he confirmed it here. We can have no doubt in our minds now that the World Champion of 2023 will be Max Verstappen. Now, another one of the big talking points from this weekend actually came from Mercedes. They had the Imola upgrade, which was delayed because of what happened in Imola, and now it came at Monaco. It's now the Monaco upgrade. And you know what, Mercedes did okay. Lewis was looking very good. He qualified 6th, was promoted to 5th after penalties. That was probably as good as he could have hoped for. He was behind both the Ferraris. A godlike lap from Esteban Ocon, who was my driver of the day. And Red Bull and Alonso. So, I mean, Lewis couldn't have done much better than that. George was down in P8. He was behind Gasly. I think he would be a little bit frustrated by that. But somehow in the race, George timed his pit stop to perfection. Lewis and Sainz both pitted, and Ocon as well. They all pitted before the rain really got heavy. And George stayed out, and George managed to get himself into P3. Now, whether that was by luck or by skill, who knows? But the simple fact of the matter is, George Russell was in P3. As soon as he comes out the pits, he slides off the track and loses 2 places to Ocon and Lewis Hamilton. And this is where the controversy arose, because he was given a 5-second penalty for an unsafe rejoin of the track. Absolutely warranted. No defending George Russell there. He dangerously joined the track and he got hit by Sergio Perez. So he got a 5-second penalty, and he then asked Mercedes, can I go in front of Lewis to cover off the Charles Leclerc penalty? Oh, Georgie boy, this was a mistake. Mercedes were never going to let that happen, partly because when we heard the radio message, Leclerc was more than 5 seconds back. I think when he made the request, I think Leclerc was within that 5-second window, but very quickly fell out of it. Leclerc was all over the place with his pace once the intermediate tyres went on. And then there's been some debate. I'm pretty sure I heard him say he wanted to try and fight Ocon. Some are saying that he was talking about Lewis fighting Ocon. Keep an eye on my Twitter. I'm going to talk about this, but I need to listen to George's radio, and I'm waiting for the various YouTube channels. I don't have F1 TV, so I'm waiting for the various YouTube channels to make a call on this and just to kind of listen to hear what happened at that moment. But right now, I think the way I heard it, I heard George Russell say that he wanted to fight Ocon. Look, George Russell for me is a thinking man's driver, somebody who can manage races, understand what's going on. Very Alonso-like in the way that he does that. And we saw him do that to great effect in Zandvoort last year, where he said, I need to be on the soft tyres, I'm going to pit. And he forced Mercedes' hand, and it actually allowed him to get a podium at the expense of his teammate, much to the chagrin of Lewis Hamilton fans. On this occasion, though, he got it wrong. There was no way he needed to be ahead of Lewis. There was no way he was going to catch Ocon. Yeah, it was a ridiculous call, and yes, he threw away a podium. He absolutely threw away a podium. People were saying he didn't throw away a podium, he would never have got P3. He was P3 on the road, but he threw it away with a mistake. And, George will be rightly kicking himself because of that, and he got the penalty. Thankfully, it didn't lose him any position, because Leclerc was so far back, it didn't make that much of a difference to him. But George, you didn't play this one particularly well. Lewis had your number all weekend, and I think it would have been a ridiculous call to let Mercedes, for Mercedes to let George go past Lewis. Yes, okay, Lewis would have kept his position with the penalty, but I think George was not significantly quicker than Lewis, even on the inters, so it was a poor call by George. But I think the abuse that was going his way from the Lewis Hamilton fan base, you got to check that. That wasn't right at all. Ferrari disaster class. Oh god, this is where BaxtyB's going to start ranting, because Ferrari threw away a podium. How did they do that? Because Charles Leclerc got a penalty. He impeded Lando Norris in Q3. He was going down the tunnel. He was talking to the team about his gap to Verstappen and to Alonso, and did not notice Lando Norris behind. And the team did not tell him. This is where Ferrari screwed up, because they needed to tell Leclerc, "Oh, careful, Norris is behind you." They tried to argue, saying, "Oh, he responded to the blue flag." Yeah, too late. Too late. You need to tell him this, Ferrari. All the talk at the beginning of this week was, could Lewis Hamilton go to Ferrari? This weekend showed why he shouldn't go. Because you're a mess. Get your house in order, then if Lewis is still available, go and get him in a couple of years' time. Right now, he shouldn't be going anywhere near you. Fred Vasseur needs to get his act together and get this team in order. This would have been a key weekend for him to see it. Then there was the strategy. Leclerc was left out too long. They tried to do the overcut. It just didn't work. He lost more ground to the cars in front of him, to Hamilton and to Sainz. Sainz was not happy with the Ferrari strategy, but I think on reflection, I think it was probably the right call. They did try calling him in about 3 times and then told him to stay out. But as we'll talk about the driver ratings, Carlos did have a little bit of a donkey moment when chasing Esteban Ocon, so he does get a slap on the wrist from me for that. But Ferrari again just throwing away good opportunities to get points and get big points, and they're further behind now to Mercedes. Absolute morons. And speaking of idiots, Aston Martin as well. Look, Fernando Alonso getting second place was absolutely fantastic for them. But, I think they threw away a potential victory. I'm not saying Alonso would have won, but I think they had the potential to win it. The rain was coming down. They put pressure on Red Bull with their strategy. Alonso was planning to go long on the hard tyres, but with the threat of rain, it was a bit unsure as to what was going to happen. Alonso comes in and sticks the mediums on, but 2 laps later he has to come in and pit again for inters. If he'd gone straight to the inters, I think there's a chance he could have got ahead of Max Verstappen and won the race. It would have been very difficult for him to manage the lead because Verstappen would have been all over the back of him, but it is Monaco and it's easier to defend. But Alonso, man, I think he threw that away. I think he and Aston together threw that away, and it was a heartbreaking loss for them. Really heartbreaking loss. I think, you know, to get second, it equals their best ever result, Vettel from 2021 in Baku, but I think they'll see this as an opportunity missed. And you know, there needs to be a wider discussion about Aston, and I'm going to do a video on this hopefully in the next day or two, where Aston are making some big moves, and unfortunately I think they need to start seriously considering a change in one of their driver seats, and it is Lance Stroll, because Lance was awful this weekend. All over the place, no pace compared to Alonso, and then he ended up retiring. If they want to consider winning world championships, I know he's the boss's son. Anyway, I'll save that for the other video. Fight of the day, pass of the day. You're thinking Monaco, you're not going to have many fights. There was actually some decent little things happening behind the top 10. There were some nice little battles going on. Fight of the day, I'd probably say kind of anywhere. It's not really a big fight, but Kevin Magnussen was quite punchy. And he was having some okay battles, but not a lot there. You know, with Logan Sargent and with Albon and with Stroll. The pass of the day was Kevin Magnussen. He did a beautiful little dummy move on Logan Sargent, just had him under manners, so, you know, just stuck it in there and then went for the gap, and Sargent just didn't see it coming. He'd spent laps building that up. It was a great little move from Kevin Magnussen. New category, Donkey of the Day. Few nominees for this. Nico Hülkenberg for a dumb move on lap 1. Logan Sargent for basically ruining his strategy and wasting his last set of hard tyres. Carlos Sainz for crashing into the back of Ocon. But no, Donkey of the Day goes to Sergio Perez, because Perez had 2 overtaking moves within the space of about 3 laps, which he bungled both of them. And he didn't get any points. He crashed it in qualifying as well. He didn't get any points. He's now miles behind Max in the championship. Donkey of the day. Absolute donkey of the day is Checo Perez. We'll get to more on that now as we talk about the driver ratings. Yes, driver ratings for the Monaco Grand Prix. Max Verstappen, 10 out of 10. One of the great qualifying laps. Managed the race perfectly. It was a great drive. I can't give him any more than... Well, I can't take any points off him. 10 out of 10. Perez, I've already explained my reason behind this. Crap qualifying, crap race, 2 huge mistakes. Yeah, he tried to have Max help him make an overtake. He followed Max through after letting him lap. Then I think he was trying to pass Albon, and he nearly hit him. What are you doing? You absolute moron. And then, of course, he went into the back of Magnussen, which was just one of the stupidest moves I've ever seen. A disaster for Checo Perez, it really was. And then he had the collision with George Russell. That wasn't really his fault, in fairness, but yeah, not a good one for Checo Perez, I think. Charles Leclerc, 7. I would have given him an 8, but the penalty, I know that wasn't his fault, but you kind of have to dock a point there. Yeah, he was good in qualifying. In the race, he did the best he could. Was fortunate to get past Sainz when Sainz slid off. We'll talk about that one in a minute. But yeah, Leclerc, I think, did the best he could, but he dropped off so badly in that intermediate tyre stint that it turned out to be a pretty miserable weekend at Monaco once again for Charles Leclerc. Carlos Sainz gets a 6. Decent qualifying, was good in the race until he went into the back of Ocon. He tried to say Ocon brake tested him. Get real. Get real, Carlos. You made a mistake. Was a bit shouty with the team, unnecessarily so. Then he slid off and lost the place to Charles Leclerc and to Pierre Gasly as well. Well, to give him his due, he didn't lose the place to Gasly after he slid off. He lost it in the pits because, of course, they were all pitting for intermediate tyres. But big mistakes, and you can't afford to make those, particularly when there are question marks over your seat, in my view. George Russell, 7. Not the greatest qualifying. It was only P8. Lewis had him under manners. Got lucky in the race, but handled it well up until the moment he made the mistake, and then you got the team orders request. Just not a good weekend for George. I think he's done well enough to get a 7 because he finished P5 from P8, but not his finest effort. Lewis gets a 9. I think this is mostly for qualifying, actually, because Lewis in Q1 and Q2 was nearly out both times and then delivered a really good lap to maximise his position from P6 and then obviously the P5 following Leclerc's penalty. He did a decent job in the race. He put Ocon under pressure, but once Sainz was out the way, could he have got the podium? I'm not sure. I think Sainz had him under control. But I think for a first weekend with the newer upgrades, I think Lewis did a really, really good job. Esteban Ocon, on the other hand, gets a 10. He nailed qualifying, didn't make any mistakes in the race. It's a 10. Simple as. Pierre Gasly gets a 7. He went from 7th to 7th. I think he maybe could have capitalised a bit more on what was happening in front. He did end up finishing behind Charles Leclerc, which I think he will be a bit frustrated about. And in particular, when Ocon has had such a good weekend, Gasly could have put his best foot forward, but it's still solid points for the team. And considering with the podium as well, Team Enston desperately needed that result. But I think Gasly will feel he could have done a bit better. Lando Norris gets an 8. Qualified in the top 10, scored points, was actually the fastest man on the track in the intermediate section at the end of the race. Had decent pace, and I think Norris did a really, really good job. Same as Oscar Piastri. The only reason he gets a 7 rather than 8 is because he failed to get out of Q2. But actually, he was able to take advantage of issues for a car in front. That's what got him into the points. A double points weekend for McLaren. We'll take those. Valtteri Bottas. I've given Bottas a 7 because he was completely anonymous in both qualifying and most of the race, and then all of a sudden he's ended up finishing P11, and you're just like, Valtteri, how the hell did you get there? He was kind of just trundling along. I didn't even see Bottas for the whole race. And then I looked at the results during my space last night, and I just went, hang on a minute, Bottas P11, what's going on here? Great effort from Bottas to get that high up, because he and Zhou were not quick. Zhou gets a 6 because he was a little bit further back. Just didn't have much pace this weekend. It was not a good weekend for Guan Yu Zhou. That's one he'll want to forget. Just constantly near the back. I think he was 19th in qualifying as well. Yeah, not his finest effort. Fernando Alonso gets a 9. The reason I'm giving Fernando a 9 is because I think he bungled pole position. I've had a look at the split times, and his sector 3 was the joint slowest of everyone alongside George Russell. And I think if he'd had a marginally quicker sector 3, I think he could have got pole. And that, for me, really made his race. But he did the best job he could in the race. I don't blame him really for the pit call. They had to make a decision, and as Ted Kravitz put it, in that split second it was maybe the right call, but then the conditions changed, and I think they probably should have had a bit more foresight. But I'm not going to take a point of Alonso for that. But he does lose a point for sector 3 in qualifying, because I think that did cost him pole position. Lance Stroll, 5. Sorry, Lance, awful weekend. You were playing bumper cars all weekend. You had no pace in comparison to Fernando. You didn't get into Q3. You should be finishing in the top 5 every race, and you're not doing it. and I'm giving you a big slap on the wrist. In fact, this is more a slap in the face. I know you're recovering from injury, but it's far enough along now that you should be doing better. Sorry, Lance, you're on watch. You're on BaxtyB's watch list. Not good. The two Haas drivers of Magnussen and Hülkenberg both get 6. Yes, Magnussen did a beautiful little pass, but he made some mistakes, and Haas also left him out on the dries way too long, and he did end up retiring as well. I know there was a bit of an issue with his brakes, but yeah, I think Magnussen could have done a little bit better there. The accident with Perez wasn't his fault at all, and yeah, just not his finest moment, particularly when he ended up in the wall. Hülkenberg was pretty anonymous all race, to be honest with you, apart from that lap 1 moment where he just decided to just shove his way past Logan Sargent. What can you do? Stupid move. Yuki Tsunoda, I debated, he was sort of between an 8 and a 7 here. I've decided to go with a 7. Really good qualifying by Yuki, probably the best qualifying of his career. Yes, it was P9, but he showed some really good pace in an absolute SH1T box of an AlphaTauri. It was a really good qualifying. In the race, he was fine. But that's it, he was fine. And I think, obviously, he then got hit with some issues with his brakes, cost him points, so a bit frustrating for him. But yeah, it's a 7 for me for Yuki Tsunoda. Nick de Vries also gets a 7. Nick had a good weekend. He was under a lot of pressure. There was talk of him losing his seat. Apparently, Helmut Marko had delivered him an ultimatum, which Helmut Marko has denied, which means it's probably true. But he had to up his performance. He got into Q2 for the first time as an AlphaTauri driver, and then he absolutely just solidly got about his business in the race. No crashes, and he just got on with his business. Really good performance by Nick de Vries, and that will settle him at least until the summer break. If he can keep this momentum going, then and put some more pressure on Tsunoda, then we could see some action. And then finally, the Williams drivers of Albon and Sargent. Albon was pretty quiet. I didn't see Alex at all during the race, other than his little battles. But he was pretty solid. It's a 7. Logan Sargent, okay in qualifying, was a bit off Alex's pace, and he just didn't deliver in the race. He cost himself his hard tyres. What was nice to see, though, is that Williams were using it as an opportunity to help him with tyre preservation. He is a rookie after all. But I think Logan will want to forget this weekend quite quickly, I think. Well, there you go. There are the driver ratings, and that actually completes my Monaco Grand Prix review. It is awesome to be back. As I said, I have been doing a lot of opera work over the last month. It's been very intense. And I've had to focus on it, but I do have a little gap where I can do a Monaco Grand Prix review. I'm thinking of potentially doing a stream to kind of talk about Baku and Miami and just kind of have a general chat with you guys, because the numbers on the channel have gone up since I last posted, and more than I thought they would. I think last I checked I was up to 71 subs, and to all of you who have subbed, thank you so much. It really means a lot to me. Even when I haven't been posting, you guys have still been hitting the subscribe button, and I'm eternally grateful to you all. We'll certainly be on the shakedown at some point this week, and yeah, guys, if you want to see more BaxtyB F1, you know what you need to do. Hit the subscribe button, comment below. I love chatting with you guys, and yeah, until next time, guys, stay safe, and I'll speak to you very soon. That didn't come out right. I shall speak to you all very soon. It's great to be back.